He's just getting comfortable.
Well, I can't sit here the rest. I can't sit and talk to people with an animal on my head.
There was a time when live television had zero safety nets, no tape delays, and absolutely no guarantee that anyone would make it to the final commercial break intact. Every single time Johnny Carson welcomed a handler onto the set, the studio transformed from a cozy late-night haven into an absolute powder keg of unscripted, wild kingdom mayhem. You are about to witness the absolute wildest, 20 most unpredictable and jaw-dropping moments where nature completely took over Carson's desk. The marmoset's top head takeover. It all started on a crisp evening in 1973 when Joan Embery brought out a creature so impossibly tiny it seemed entirely harmless. The star of the moment was a pygmy marmoset, a miniature primate small enough to fit inside a coffee mug. Johnny Carson, forever the gracious host, leaned in close to admire the fuzzy little creature. But live television has a funny way of stripping away all dignity in a matter of seconds. Sensing an elevated vantage point, the marmoset scampered right off Embery's hand, navigated up Johnny's suit sleeve, and parked itself squarely on top of his perfectly coiffed hair. The audience erupted, but the true comedy was only just beginning. As Johnny sat completely frozen, terrified that any sudden movement might spook his new furry hat, the little primate decided to make itself entirely too comfortable. In full view of millions of viewers at home, the marmoset casually relieved itself right on top of the host's head. Johnny's eyes went wide, but ever the consummate professional, he slowly turned to the camera with a look of pure, defeated resignation. He did not flinch, he did not scream, he just let the warm reality of unscripted wild animal television sink right into his scalp. Ready for another wild encounter? Desk-crashing elephant. If you thought a tiny primate causing head-level havoc was as wild as late-night television could get, you clearly never met Carol the elephant. Joan Embery returned to the show with this energetic young Asian elephant, promising Johnny and the audience a demonstration of incredible discipline and intelligence. Carol was trained to follow various verbal cues, including a signature stunt where she would gently sit down on command like an oversized puppy. Johnny stepped back, grinning with his usual light-hearted curiosity, eager to see the grand showcase. But live television has an uncanny way of throwing training out the window the second the bright studio lights hit. When Joan gave the command to sit, Carol did not target the reinforced floor mat prepared by the stage crew. Instead, she backed her massive hindquarters straight up toward Johnny's famous wooden desk. Before anyone could react, several tons of baby elephant planted itself squarely onto the desk, resulting in an instantaneous, explosive crunch of splintering mahogany. Papers flew into the air, pencil cups shattered, and the iconic late-night centerpiece crumpled into instant kindling under the sheer weight of the guest. Johnny leapt backward with lightning speed, clutching his chest in genuine shock, while Ed McMahon doubled over in uncontrollable laughter. As the dust settled and Carol casually stood back up looking pleased with herself, Johnny surveyed the literal wreckage of his workspace, completely speechless at how quickly a casual animal demonstration had turned into a full-scale structural demolition. The jacket-exploring tarantula. Few creatures inspire immediate visceral dread quite like a giant hairy spider, and Jim Fowler knew exactly how to push Johnny's buttons when he brought a massive tarantula onto the set. Johnny, despite his brave front, was notoriously skittish around creepy crawlies, making this particular encounter an instant tension cooker for everyone in the studio. Fowler carefully placed the oversized arachnid onto Johnny's outstretched hand, reassuring the host in a calm, soothing voice that the creature was completely harmless and merely curious about its surroundings. Johnny stared at the sprawling, eight-legged beast with a tight, nervous smile, doing everything in his power to keep his hands from shaking on national television. But curious was an understatement. The tarantula decided it was time to explore new territory and began a slow, deliberate march up Johnny's forearm. The studio grew dead silent as the spider navigated the fabric of his suit, eventually disappearing right into the lapel of Johnny's jacket. The look of sheer terror on Carson's face was unscripted perfection. He froze like a statue, barely daring to breathe out of fear that the slightest chest movement might provoke a strike directly beneath his suit collar. He slowly cut his eyes toward Fowler, whispering for help without moving a single muscle in his jaw. The crowd was caught in a mix of terrified gasps and nervous laughter as Fowler casually reached in to retrieve the crawling hitchhiker, leaving Johnny visibly traumatized and desperately needing a stiff drink to recover his nerves. The red-diapered baboon heist. When animal handler Jim Fowler stepped onto the stage, leading a full-grown, surprisingly muscular baboon dressed in a bright red diaper, Johnny Carson knew he was in for a wild ride. Baboons are notoriously clever, wildly unpredictable, and possess an ego that can easily rival any Hollywood A-lister. The moment the primate's feet touched the carpet, it completely ignored Fowler's commands and made a beeline straight for Johnny's sanctuary behind the desk. With lightning agility, the red-diapered menace leaped onto the mahogany surface, scattering Johnny's carefully arranged notes like confetti. But the baboon wasn't just looking to cause chaos, it was looking for loot. It aggressively snatched Johnny's classic brass pen, shoving it into its mouth to inspect it for edible qualities before realizing it wasn't a snack. Johnny, caught completely off guard, slowly slid his chair backward into the dark backdrop, putting as much physical distance between himself and those impressive canine teeth as humanly possible. The baboon then turned its gaze directly at Johnny, baring its teeth and slapping the desk in a classic primate show of dominance. Carson held his breath, raising his hands in a posture of complete surrender, while the studio audience roared with nervous delight. Loose vulture. Takeover. Handling wild birds on live television is always a risky gamble, but nothing could have prepared the crew for the absolute chaos that unfolded when a massive turkey vulture graced the stage. With a wingspan stretching nearly 6 feet across, the majestic yet terrifying bird was meant to sit calmly on its handler's gloved perch, while Johnny delivered his signature witty banter. However, the bright studio lights and the sudden thunderous applause from the audience instantly triggered the bird's primal survival instincts. Without warning, the vulture launched itself directly off the perch, flapping its heavy, powerful wings furiously and creating a localized windstorm that blew papers off the set. Instead of staying in the designated demonstration area, the panicked scavenger flew straight toward the rapt studio audience, sending horrified audience members in the front rows ducking for cover beneath their seats. Johnny didn't hesitate for a single microsecond. He completely abandoned his post, sprinting behind a sturdy studio pillar and peeking out with wide, frantic eyes as the giant bird circled the high rafters of the NBC studio like an ominous shadow. The band members scattered, clutching their instruments to protect them from airborne danger, while handlers frantically tried to coax the bird back down with pieces of raw meat. It took several agonizing minutes of airborne pandemonium to regain control, leaving Johnny out of breath, visibly shaken, and vowing to stick to land animals for the foreseeable future. How did live television ever manage to survive these high-flying airborne disasters without losing a host in the process? The escaped leopard shark. You might think aquatic guests would offer a safer, more contained experience for late-night hosts. But bringing a live leopard shark onto the set proved that water doesn't guarantee control. Joan and Barry arrived with a specialized glass-walled transport tank designed to give Johnny and the audience a clear view of the sleek, spotted predator swimming inside. Johnny leaned over the top rim of the tank, peering into the murky water, while tossing out a few classic aquatic zingers to keep the crowd laughing. However, the combination of warm studio lights and the vibration of the live broadcast set off the shark's reflexes. With a sudden, explosive burst of muscle, the leopard shark thrashed its tail violently against the water's surface, sending a massive wave splashing over the sides of the glass structure. The sudden surge drenched Johnny's tailored suit, soaked the studio floor, and launched the wet, slippery shark right out of the tank and onto the hardwood stage. The studio erupted into complete bedlam as the sleek predator flopped frantically across the slick floorboards, sloshing water everywhere. Johnny scrambled backward, leaping atop his chair with incredible agility to keep his leather shoes far away from the thrashing tail. Handlers rushed in with wet towels, diving onto the floor like slippery football players to wrangle the creature before it injured itself, leaving a completely soaked Carson standing high on his perch, staring in sheer disbelief at the aquatic frenzy unfolding at his feet. The baby tiger's desk jump. There is something undeniably captivating about wild big cat cubs, but their adorable, fluffy exteriors often mask raw, predatory power and insanely quick reflexes. When Jim Fowler brought out an energetic baby tiger, Johnny's co-host Ed McMahon sat nearby in his signature armchair, chuckling heartily and enjoying the view from what he assumed was a completely safe distance. The cub was initially exploring the carpeted floor under Fowler's close supervision, sniffing curiously at the studio monitors and the edge of Johnny's desk. Without a moment's notice, a sudden camera movement startled the young predator, sending its instincts straight into high gear. The tiger pivoted instantly, coiled its powerful hind legs, and launched its surprisingly heavy body straight through the air, heading directly toward the couch. Instead of landing on the floor, the airborne feline slammed right into Ed McMahon's chest, taking the large sidekick completely by surprise and knocking the breath clean out of him. The entire studio froze as Ed clutched the squirming, muscular cub in his arms, his famous booming laugh instantly turning into a high-pitched gasp of surprise. Johnny doubled over behind his desk, holding his sides in hysterical tears of laughter, as his massive sidekick struggled to gently cradle the fierce little beast while keeping those sharp claws away from his face. The broomstick turtle. Stare down. When people think of turtles, they usually imagine slow, harmless creatures ambling along at a lazy pace. But when Jim Fowler dragged out a massive alligator-snapping turtle, the studio atmosphere instantly shifted from playful curiosity to high-stakes survival. Weighing close to 100 pounds with a rugged prehistoric shell, this particular reptile looked like a living dinosaur that had wandered onto a modern television set with a massive chip on its shoulder. Johnny carefully peered over the edge of his desk, keeping what he hoped was a sensible distance from the armored giant. However, snapping turtles are famous for lightning-fast striking speeds that defy their bulky frames. Feeling threatened by the bright studio lights and sudden applause, the giant turtle lunged forward with explosive power, snapping its razor-sharp beak shut with an agonizingly loud wooden crunch that echoed clearly through the microphones. Johnny recoiled instantly, clutching his heart as his life flashed before his eyes. Realizing that his mahogany desk offered zero defense against a dinosaur with jaw pressure strong enough to snap bones, Carson reached into the prop corner and grabbed a heavy wooden broom. He held it out like a lion tamer, nervously probing the aggressive reptile while keeping himself far back. The parrot who hijacked the show. Late-night hosts are absolute masters of pacing, timing, and controlling the flow of a conversation. But all of that polished broadcasting experience went straight out the window when Howard the parrot took the stage. Howard was an unusually large, colorful macaw who brought a remarkably booming voice and an insanely loud, human-like laugh that sounded like a maniacal cartoon villain. Johnny sat back, fully prepared to interview the handler about the bird's incredible intelligence and speech patterns. Before the handler could even finish introducing the avian guest, Howard took total control of the broadcast. The bird tilted its head, locked eyes with Johnny, and unleashed a piercing, squawking cackle that immediately filled every corner of the studio. Every single time Johnny tried to deliver a joke or ask a basic question, Howard chimed in with flawless comedic timing, completely drowning out the host with his ear-splitting laughter. The studio audience quickly joined in, completely swept away by the absurdity of a bird relentlessly mocking one of America's greatest entertainers. Johnny tried everything to regain control, trying to talk over the bird, deadpanning to the camera, and even offering peace offerings, but Howard simply laughed louder at every attempt. The python straightjacket. Reptiles are inherently unpredictable, but giant constrictors bring a unique kind of claustrophobic tension that makes live studio audiences instantly hold their breath. Joan Embury made a triumphant return to the show carrying a massive Burmese python that stretched over 15 feet in length and required multiple handlers just to support its immense weight. Eager to give the home viewers a close-up look, Johnny offered to help hold a portion of the thick, muscular body across his lap. That generous offer proved to be a massive mistake within seconds. As Joan discussed the hunting habits of constrictors, the python decided to make itself right at home on the host. It slowly and deliberately began to coil its heavy, powerful body around Johnny's legs, torso, and arms, utilizing him as a living climbing post. Johnny maintained his classic signature grin, but as the snake tightened its grip, his breathing became noticeably shallow, and his posture grew completely stiff under the immense weight. Within minutes, Johnny was effectively locked in a living straitjacket, immobilized by hundreds of pounds of pure muscle completely wrapping around his limbs. He looked toward Joan with a hilarious mix of politeness and genuine distress, pleading with his eyes for someone to unwrap him before he became a permanent fixture on the set. Handlers eventually stepped in to carefully uncoil the giant constricting beast, leaving Carson gasping for air, shaking out his tingling limbs, and promising never to play human scaffolding for a monster reptile again. How in the world did live television manage to transition from slippery, suffocating reptiles straight into the terrifying jaw-snapping territory of big cat apex predators without losing a host in the process? The snow leopard whispers. Snow leopards are among the most elusive and revered big cats on Earth, but bringing one into a high-octane television studio is a recipe for absolute heart-in-your-throat tension. The moment this magnificent, heavy-coated predator stepped out onto the stage floor, the entire atmosphere shifted. Gone was the usual light-hearted, chuckling mood of the show, replaced instantly by the icy realization that an apex predator was roaming just feet away from Johnny's chair. Johnny, who loved big cats but respected their dangerous power, leaned forward in his chair to get a better look. That was all it took to draw the cat's intense focus. The snow leopard froze in its tracks, lowered its heavy head, and locked eyes directly with the host from mere inches away. A low, vibrating growl echoed subtly through Johnny's lapel microphone, sending a collective chill down the spines of the studio crew and the audience. Recognizing the extreme sensitivity of the situation, Carson completely dropped his usual loud, booming broadcast persona. He began communicating with Joan Embery and the audience in a barely audible, soothing whisper, keeping his body utterly motionless so as not to trigger the feline's predatory instincts. The Ostrich Studio Sprint. When you think of chaotic animal appearances, birds rarely seem as threatening as big cats or giant constrictors, until you encounter a full-grown 8-foot-tall ostrich with legs built like iron sledgehammers. Jim Fowler guided this massive flightless bird onto the set, reassuring Johnny that the towering creature was accustomed to humans. But ostriches are notoriously twitchy, easily startled, and possess a brain roughly the size of a walnut. The moment the loud studio laughter broke out over a joke, the ostrich went into complete fight-or-flight mode, choosing immediate chaotic flight. With long, awkward strides, the massive bird broke free from Fowler's grip and began sprinting wildly across the hardwood floor, sending papers, coffee cups, and stage props flying in every direction. The sound of its massive feet stomping across the stage echoed like a runaway drum solo. Johnny did not bother standing his ground like a brave talk show host. Instead, he dove behind his famous mahogany desk, ducking low to avoid taking a high-speed kick from a bird that can knock down a lion. Handlers sprinted after the feathered speedster, tumbling over monitors and furniture in a desperate attempt to corner the bird before it crashed through the main camera rig. Johnny slowly peeked his head out over the edge of his desk, watching the wild circus in pure, wide-eyed amazement. The pantleg ferrets. Ferrets are notorious for being hyperactive, infinitely curious, and almost liquid in their ability to squeeze through tiny spaces. When an animal handler brought out a pair of these energetic little creatures, Johnny assumed he was in for a simple, cute demonstration of domesticated tricks. He sat back, smiling down at the squirming furballs as they darted frantically across the surface of his desk, sniffing at his pens and microphone cables. However, ferrets don't care about late-night broadcast schedules or personal boundaries. Spotting the dark, mysterious tunnel formed by Johnny's tailored suit pants, one of the bold little critters made a sudden break for it. Before anyone could react, the ferret vanished directly up the cuff of Johnny's left pant leg, beginning a frantic scramble toward his knee. Johnny leaped out of his chair as if he had been struck by lightning, dancing around the stage in a panicked jig while frantically slapping at his own leg to stop the upward progress of the furry intruder. The studio audience erupted into tears of laughter as the king of late night lost all composure, high-stepping across the floor while pleading with the handler to extricate the creature before it reached uncharted territory. The snarling cheetah tension. Cheetahs are famous for being the fastest land mammals on the planet, possessing a lithe, razor-sharp athletic frame that radiates pure speed and precision. When Joan Embery brought out a fully grown, magnificent cheetah on a thick leather leash, the tension inside the studio immediately shot through the roof. Johnny knew better than to treat a big cat like a house pet, maintaining a nervous, respectful distance from the start. Despite the handler's calm demeanor, the cat was clearly on high alert in the unfamiliar environment. Every single time Johnny made a sudden hand gesture, delivered a sharp punchline, or moved his feet on the wooden floor, the cheetah's ears went flat back against its head, and it unleashed a menacing, guttural snarl that cut through the air. The raw power behind the cat's warning signs was enough to make even the bravest late-night host sweat through his suit. Carson sat rigidly in his chair, carefully weighing every single word and breath to avoid provoking the hypersensitive predator. The interview became a masterclass in reading body language, as Johnny navigated the conversation with extreme caution, trading his usual physical comedy for deadpan, motionless humor. Is it even possible for the show to bounce back from intense predator standoffs, or are we about to watch desktop props get completely obliterated by aquatic jaws? The paper, shredding crocodile. If you ever wanted to see Johnny Carson's carefully prepared show notes destroyed in a fraction of a second, bringing a young freshwater crocodile onto his desk was certainly the way to do it. Handled by Jim Fowler, the prehistoric reptile was meant to showcase the incredible bite force and armor-like scales of one of nature's most effective predators. But as soon as the crocodile was set down on the polished wood surface, it made its feelings about late-night television crystal clear. With zero warning, the crocodile thrashed its powerful tail back and forth, turning Johnny's orderly desktop into an absolute war zone. Its jaws snapped shut with a violent, terrifying wooden clack, catching a thick stack of Carson's joke cards and monologue notes right in its razor-sharp teeth. In a violent burst of rolling instincts, the reptile shredded the paper into hundreds of tiny floating pieces of confetti in seconds. Johnny jumped back so fast his desk chair almost flipped over backward, raising his arms to shield his face from flying paper and splattering water. The audience roared with delight as the talk show host watched his entire evening's schedule literally get eaten by an ancient killer. Carson could only shake his head, grab a fresh pencil, and marvel at the fact that he was officially taking orders from a reptile with an appetite for comedy. The two-headed dilemma. Mother Nature occasionally throws a biological anomaly into the mix that leaves even seasoned naturalists completely speechless. And that was precisely the case when a living two-headed snake arrived on set. Brought out in a secure, velvet-lined glass enclosure, this incredible reptile featured two distinct, fully functioning heads sharing a single elongated body. Johnny Carson leaned in close to inspect the extraordinary creature, his trademark curiosity immediately taking over. As the host watched in total fascination, the inherent comedy of the creature's unique biology began to play out in real time. Each head possessed its own independent brain, leading to a hilarious tug-of-war as one head tried to slither toward the left side of the desk, while the other pulled doggedly toward the right. The resulting stalemate had the snake practically tying itself in knots, completely paralyzed by its own internal disagreement over which direction to explore first. Johnny seized on the absurdity instantly, firing off quick-witted jokes about how the snake perfectly represented political debates and television network executives trying to make a single decision. But beneath the jokes was genuine awe as Carson watched the handlers carefully feed the creature, marveling at how two separate minds managed to navigate life inside one body. Stage-smothering water buffalo. When guests bring small or medium-sized animals onto a set, there is always room to maneuver around desks, chairs, and camera rigs. But when Jim Fowler walked out leading a full-grown multi-hundred-pound water buffalo, the entire physical footprint of The Tonight Show vanished in an instant. The massive, horned beast lumbered onto the carpeted stage, making the cozy, iconic late-night set look tiny, fragile, and utterly absurd by comparison. The sheer scale of the animal immediately redefined the space. Its massive horns, spanning several feet across, swept dangerously close to the overhead studio lighting and delicate microphone booms with every slow turn of its heavy head. Johnny stood up from his chair, backing all the way up against the studio curtain just to keep himself out of the creature's immense blind spot, marveling at the wall of sheer muscle standing on his stage. To make matters even more tense, the heavy beast decided to take a long, deliberate break right in front of the desk, completely blocking the main camera angle and staring blankly into the lens like an unbothered star. Johnny couldn't stop chuckling at the sheer surrealism of the scene, pointing out to the audience that his monologue was being officially upstaged by several tons of livestock. The musical dog audition. Not every wild animal moment involved ferocious predators or exotic beasts. Sometimes, the simplest domestic pets brought the most chaotic entertainment. Johnny dedicated a special segment to everyday pet owners, showing off their animals' weirdest hidden talents. Enter an unassuming mixed-breed dog whose owner claimed possessed a world-class singing voice capable of matching musical pitches. Johnny sat at his desk with a skeptically raised eyebrow, signaling the studio pianist to strike a gentle chord to kick off the performance. The second the music echoed through the speakers, the dog threw its head back, pointed its nose toward the studio rafters, and unleashed a piercing, mournful howl that completely derailed the melody. Every time the pianist tried to change tunes, the dog adjusted its pitch into a delightfully off-key duet. The studio erupted in uncontrollable laughter as Johnny buried his face in his hands, completely overwhelmed by the dog's sheer enthusiasm. The pitch-imperfect canine serenaded the nation with unbridled passion, ignoring its handler's frantic signals to quiet down. The gentle elephant hug. While big animals often brought destruction and panic to the studio, some moments delivered pure, heart-melting magic that left viewers completely entranced. Beloved actress and legendary animal advocate Betty White joined Johnny on set, bringing along a charming 4-year-old Asian elephant named Dandy. Dandy walked out onto the carpet with a gentle, curious energy that immediately put the entire room at ease. Johnny kneeled down near the young elephant, speaking soft encouragement while holding out a slice of apple as a peace offering. Dandy accepted the treat delicately, then slowly raised her heavy trunk, wrapping it gently around Johnny's neck in a warm, unmistakable embrace. Johnny sat completely motionless, a genuine, joyful smile lighting up his face as the gentle giant pulled him close for a quiet, intimate moment on national television. The audience let out a collective sigh of awe, watching a rare instance where the wild unpredictability of nature transformed into absolute sweetness. Betty White beamed with pride from the couch as Johnny patted the elephant's trunk, thoroughly charmed by a guest that didn't destroy his desk or scare him off stage. It proved that behind all the chaotic comedy, Carson possessed a deep, genuine affection for every creature that walked onto his show. Can a live show truly cap off decades of wild animal mayhem without one final, spine-tingling encounter with a predator that laughs in the face of danger? The laughing hyena. Known for their bone-crushing jaw pressure and chilling vocalizations, the hyena paced the studio floor on a taut leash, its low-slung, powerful shoulders rippling under the bright stage lights. Johnny sat back in his leather chair, maintaining a watchful, cautious eye as the restless scavenger paced back and forth just inches from his desk. Without warning, the hyena let out a series of high-pitched, manic vocalizations that sounded disturbingly like human laughter, echoing sharply off the studio walls. The unnatural sound sent a nervous, giggling shudder straight through the audience and crew. Johnny didn't miss a beat, looking directly into the camera and deadpanning that he had finally found a guest who appreciated his jokes more than his own band leader. But beneath the quick humor was an unmistakable edge of high-voltage tension. The hyena's wild, unpredictable energy kept everyone on the edge of their seats until the very last frame, serving as the ultimate grand finale to Johnny Carson's unforgettable, unscripted Wild Kingdom. Comment your favorite moment, and make sure to hit subscribe for more in this channel.